In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. In today's gospel, we hear about this, literally the second calling of St. Peter, and we see that he is out fishing. He's heard about Jesus at this point. He knows who he is. He's had his brother Andrew say, "Come and see, we found the Messiah." And he's fishing, and he realizes that he's going empty. He's not catching anything. And they're done with their day. If you can just envision this, they're kind of done with their day. They've been up since early morning. Now, has anybody been fishing here? Okay, when do you typically go fishing? Eleni, when do you go? The summertime? What time of the day, though? Angelo? Morning, right? Early in the morning. Usually when we see people fish, they fish early in the morning or kind of at dusk, but not during the middle of the day is kind of the time when the fish are doing something different. So we know from the disciples and their writings in the gospel that was true, because they would get up very early and they would go out while it was still dark and they would go fishing. So it's daytime. They're washing their nets. They're done. They were out all night. They caught nothing. So they were up from early in the morning. They were out until they realized we're not getting anything. And then Jesus just kind of walks by. You can picture Jesus in complete control of everything in his life. He just walks by and sits in their boat. And they know who he is. And then he says, "Let's go out a little bit, and I'm going to teach." So he goes out and he teaches. And then he tells Peter, "Go into the deep and throw your net." Now, they were out all night, hours and hours. And for those who fish, sometimes people want to catch fish, and sometimes people want to escape the world when they fish. But if you were a professional fisherman, that's your life. And if you had no fish, you had no money, you couldn't support your family, you couldn't support yourself. So it was a big deal that they came up empty with no fish. So he says, "But I know who you are, and I will go out and throw down the net." So he throws down the net, and they catch so many fish that they can't even bring it in. So he calls to the other boat. Now, who's in the other boat? Who is he partners with? Which is it's thrown in there very quickly into the gospel, but it's a very important thing, is James and John, the other two disciples, were his partners in his little fishing business. So they come to, and they're dragging the fish, and then as soon as St. Peter sees the amount of fish, he falls at Jesus' knees, and he says, You have to go away from me. I'm a sinful person. I am not someone that is worthy to be in your presence or worthy for what you just did for us. And then he says, "Don't worry, I'll make you fishers of men." They go back to the shore. Now, this is the important part of this gospel, too. They go back to the shore. They caught the biggest catch, probably of their life. Their nets were breaking. They had to call 2 boats to pull it in. They dragged these fish ashore. They could have cashed in. They could have, taken a break for a couple days maybe. What do? They leave everything. They leave it. They leave it all behind. They leave their nets. They leave their boats, and they follow Jesus. The beginning of their ministry starts with this great gift from God. And then that great gift was, they realized that it wasn't the fish that was the gift. It was Christ coming to them and saying, "I want you to become fishers of men." And do you see how easy that was? I mean, you could just hear, not everything that's captured in the gospel was everything that was said. Don't think Jesus just spoke in one sentence here and there. I mean, there's filler words and filler sentences in there too. So you can kind of imagine the rest of this conversation saying, "Yeah, you caught a lot of fish, but let me explain to you about catching men. What does that mean?" So they see this great amount of fish. They said, we could be, with Jesus as our co-pilot in the boat, we could really make a lot of money. But they don't. They walk away and they say, "Where is this going? Where is he going? And where am I going?" Now, in our lives, we come up empty sometimes. And the gospel reminds us that, and Christ reminds us that we can do nothing without God. Nothing. We don't even have life without him, let alone the things that we think we do on our own that we're in charge of, that we can contour in our lives. We can't do anything without him. But then he says, with me, all things are possible. So we could do nothing without him, and we could do everything with him. Now, the disciples knew that, but do we know that? Do we really feel that? Because when we come up empty in life, and when we come up feeling short and lacking in some way, do we realize that the thing that is lacking is our relationship with God, our encounter with God, God's presence in our lives? And are we relying on ourselves too much where we go empty? Or are we looking to God where we will completely be filled? There comes a time in our lives when we feel God. We know that he's there. We encounter him. We have that feeling inside. We have that understanding that he's there. And then there's the times where we don't feel him. And we say, where did he go? Why is he missing? What is happening? And it's a reminder to us when we get to that point that we have to look to God for all of our help in this world and all good things to come from him, and realize too that when we don't have him in our lives, we will realize that we end. And the fathers of the church tell us all the time that what we do just for ourselves dies with us, but what we do for others lives on forever. And why is that? Is because what we do for others is doing that directly to Christ himself. But have we encountered him? Are we empty? Now you're here today because you are in need of God's presence. Whether you were brought here and thrown into the car seat and brought here under duress, or you came here because you wanted to be here, whatever the case is, you're here. And when you're here, it's a time for us to realize what we're missing in ourselves and to reach out to God and say, be the one in the boat with me. Be the one. I can't do this on my own. St. Peter could not catch fish on his own, even with his partners. He came up empty. But with God in the boat, it was too much for him alone. He had to bring others to help bring these nets ashore. And the other rendition of the gospel, not that we read today, but another version of it in one of the synoptic gospels, says that although there were so many fish, the net didn't break. So God didn't even let the net break. And St. Theophan reminds us, and I reminded those who were there on Friday night for our lecture, that St. Theophan says that we are the modern day contemporary nets of the disciples. How do we catch others? How do we bring them in? Is by God's command and by letting God be our guide in our lives. If you're hitting a wall with something in your life, it's probably because God doesn't want you to go that way. And then when the doors open to other things and it becomes very easy and simple and blessed, we know that God has his hand directly in that particular path in our life. But the key is to remain faithful and to remain in the state of perseverance so that we can continue to have God with us. And it's not to say that God walks away from us or leaves us alone, but many times we walk away from him. We will step away from God. And the icon that we have in the back of the ladder, I've mentioned this before, but I put that there because that is the closest icon that I could get to the judgment icon, which is typically the icon that you see when you exit the church. So if you've ever been to Greece, if you've ever been to an Orthodox country, or a church that is done in traditional Byzantine iconography and done appropriately, when you walk out, you see the judgment scene. In fact, even on Mount Athos, in the courtyards, as you would go into the church, they have these like overhangs that are arched, and you look up and you see judgment and scenes of the book of Revelation. Why? It's to remind us that we cannot do anything without God, and that without him, we're lost. We're left alone. we are empty. And when we become empty and alone, we start going away from him, and in a way that we become completely lost to our own identity in God's eyes, and our own identity many times in our family's eyes. So as we look at our lives today and look at the reason why you're here today, reach out to God and say, be with me in my boat of life. The church is the main body of the church, this area right here, is called the naos. And the naos is really after the word from the ship of the church. And sometimes you'll even see in some churches in the traditional candilia, we have up in the front, we have on our candilia, we have the double-headed eagles. But sometimes you'll see a boat that's like dangling from the bottom. And the boat is to remind us that we are in the ship of God, all going the same direction. And the priest steers the boat, and everyone is facing and going towards God. So we are in the boat. We just have to remember that our life is continuing to go on that path closer to God, and to not kick him out of the boat and say, I got this, I can do this by myself. And also to remember that he is more than welcome in our lives, and to continue to invite him into our lives. And then when we see what he brings us, we won't just stop at the material things. We'll go beyond that and realize where that comes from. If you're successful in life, it's not because how smart you are. It's because God has allowed that for you and has brought you something that will help you. Now, it's not just successful in money. It's successful in your business, successful in your life, your marriage, your friends, your family, all those things, is because you have brought God somehow into your life and are bringing that and moving that forward. The key is not to get it and say, look what I've done. Look what I've made for myself. We have to be very careful of that, because the fathers of the church also remind us when we do that, then God steps back from us to remind us that it's not us. And then we fall hard. We fall away hard. So remember this, this beautiful scene of St. Peter. And, you know, God willing, we'll have his relics in our church soon. But remember this beautiful encounter with Christ where he's standing there and just falls down before him and says, I'm not worthy of this. And that's St. Peter, the preeminent apostle. How much less worthy are we? But what do? We fall down before God in prayer. We fall down before him confessing. We fall down before him in approaching to receive the sacraments. And what does he do? He lifts us up and says, just walk with me. And that's the call for today in this gospel, is just to walk with God and let him lead you in the direction that leads to grace, that leads to this feeling of growth and this spiritual growth and relationship with God, but most of all, that will lead us to salvation. Amen.